ethnic studies too, to some extent, is a kind of form of management within the corporate university system. I'm looking at that dimension of Asian American studies as an institutionalized form, but in it, I think Asian American knowledge related to Asian America is very much caught in liberal multiculturalism, which really celebrates differences, and differences in terms of culturalized way, compartmentalized way, in a sometimes essentialized way. So liberal multicultural celebration of differences, which is the dominant, I think, framework of the institutionalized form of knowledge about Asian America, is really working within the sort of liberal multicultural management within the state, for instance, in the United States. It is really working to talk about the differences, different experiences, different historical perspectives, different injuries, without disturbing the normativity of citizenship or the state formation. So ethnicity model, ethno-national model is very much conducive to this kind of celebratory liberal multiculturalism. And I don't think one can deny that Asian American studies, which is, I think, can be separated from Asian American critique, is very much a part of this formation. What I also want to say is that this celebratory liberal multiculturalism is not just domestic, internal to United States, and I'm particularly talking about the United States here, but it is also global. So by that, what I mean is liberal multiculturalism is also part of the Trans-Pacific formation. It also served as a Cold War management form for the United States. For the United States, immediately after the post-War II, in the post-World War II world, when Japanese empire collapsed, particularly in Asia and the Pacific, in the vacuum of the presence of the previous empire, and vastly sort of decolonizing territory, rapidly decolonizing territory, how would the United States manage, emerge into this space as a sort of dominant superpower, and how to manage this space? So liberal multiculturalism in a global context precisely served that purpose. So in that context, sort of paralleling the ethnicity model in the domestic national liberal multicultural model, in the global multicultural model, nationalism, right? National formation became this elements of difference, categories whereby these differences are talked about, different historical experiences are narrated, understood, and distributed. So national difference, national history became this kind of element, categories, constituents of global management of differences under U.S. Cold War hegemony within this liberal multicultural, global liberal multicultural rhetoric. Another important thing about this national difference is it's also very much culturalized. The difference is talked about in terms of culture. So, for instance, I'm thinking of the concept of culture talk by Mahmoud Mamdani, where he talks about culture talk is very much sort of important ways in which Cold War, U.S. global management became effectuated. So the national difference talked about, especially in terms of cultural difference, ethno-national difference, worked to really displace various kinds of political, economic issues and allowed us to talk about in terms of a cultural way. Now, all of this is to say that there was, in terms of a particular Cold War formation in Asia and the Pacific, in the Trans-Pacific way as well as intra-Asia, there was a global compartmentalization and management of differences in the name of national culture, or particularly ethno-national culture, or ethno-nationally described historical experiences and voice, and so on and so forth. context, this was very much, and I think the ways in which ethnic literature comes into play in this as a supplement to universal humanism, I think also became very much conducive and supportive of this kind of global liberal cultural management, celebratory kind of management of different differences through culturalization and ethno-nationalization. So I'm talking about this kind of collusion between domestic liberal multiculturalism and the global liberal multiculturalism as a sort of management tool for U.S. hegemony in Asia. So what happens when ethno-nationally formed, and particularly sort of liberal, universalistic, humanistic kind of knowledge about Asian America travels to inter-Asia context is the sort of next question that I would like to raise. And inter-Asia critique, and this is something that I would like to hear really more from Professor Chen here, but from what I understand, especially from the project, for instance, Inter-Asia Cultural Studies, as Professor Chen and others have promoted here, is precisely addressing the certain kind of knowledge structure and power formation that took place after World War II under U.S. Cold War hegemony, which is still persisting. And if I may insert another footnote to this, the post-World War II Cold War hegemony is continuing, and it is also building on, grafted onto the pre-World War II colonial structure, right? So what we see in the post-World War II U.S. Cold War hegemony is a continuation of colonial, enduring colonial economic political structure, sort of reincarnated into neo-colonial structure. So what I understand from the inter-Asia cultural critique, or the intervention of inter-Asia cultural critique in recent years, is precisely the questioning of this structure. And in this critiquing, one of the important objective criticism was this ethno-national formation, or nationalized history, or nationalized kind of understanding of differences, or the ways in which different Asian Asian elements, or elements in Asia, differences in Asia, have been managed through ethno-national categorization. So I think that, from what I understand, that is one of the important objective critique that's been pursued under project of inter-Asia cultural critique. However, what happens then if celebratory multicultural, liberal multicultural Asian American studies, or knowledge about Asian America, is inserted into this